Hi, my name's Hamish Sewell. I'm the founder and the main producer on the Soundtrails app, which is a location-based audio app. And we've been building stories on location for 8 years. Soundtrails operates via mobile phones, where you walk in and out of GPS-triggered stories. My background is in oral history and radio production, so the work that we do is highly researched and highly produced. And about 8 years ago, I got involved with location-based audio because I'd been working in radio broadcasting, and I could see that radio broadcasting just wasn't going to give me the opportunities I wanted. It wasn't going to support me in a career. And we were lucky enough to be able to build our own app, our own location-based audio app. So that was 8 years ago. That was version 1. And in about 3 weeks, we're launching version 2 Soundtrails at the Black Box Theatre in Nambour, Queensland. So I've sat myself down here in front of the computer to record this because I feel like it's an important, sort of like a travel log almost, or a blog while I'm actually out on location building a Soundtrail. And after 8 years, I feel that I've got a fair understanding now as to what's going on in this highly nascent area. For those of you who don't know, location-based audio sort of began around the late 90s, where people were able to get their personal devices, their personal computers and stuff, and they were running around fields and they were able to see where they were in relation to GPS points on a map. And they were able to cache various bits and bobs in there, and they were able to get them to activate while they were walking around the paddocks or where it might be. And this was considered really revolutionary at the time because it was really changing the configuration, I suppose, of the way that we see the world around us and the way in which we are able to construct stories and memories and histories in the world around us. And around that time, there was a really important document which was published, a little known, but I think quite important document, which was called the Head Map Manifesto by, what was this, Ben Russell, was it Ben Russell? And it was really, I guess, celebrating the ways in which location-based media, and at that time that was through computers and laptops, location-based media was going to really transform the way in which we were able to engage in the world around us. It wasn't just a sort of a tactile world around us and the physical reality around us, but it was also going to be a world around us which was mediated through technology, and things like mobile phones, which came along in the future, really, I guess, sort of manifested what Ben Russell was sort of foreseeing, which is this kind of augmented reality, this reality that's also able to not only kind of track us, but it's able to bring down data, stories, voices, images, videos in relation to places and spaces. So suddenly, this whole idea of maps and the world around us changes because, of course, this data, which is able to be accessed and entered into literally on locations like where I'm standing now, is suddenly it explodes. The opportunity explodes, and it's very much this idea of the coordinates, the latitudes and longitudes that are feeding into what data is placed where. So sorry about that. That's a bit of a long-winded introduction to what I'm doing. So here I am in at my little wee hut out in the bush in northern New South Wales, just out of Tenterfield. And Tenterfield's at the northern end of the New England the New England Highlands here in New South Wales. This would be considered the northern end of the high country. And the project that I'm working on at the moment is called the Bald Rock Soundtrail. And Bald Rock is about 30 kilometres to the north of Tenterfield. And the Soundtrail is one of four national park soundtrails, which have been commissioned by the New England High Country bushfire recovery money. And myself and two other producers, we're lucky enough to be out here, to be engaging with community, researching and building a range of stories which people can now, well, when they're published, people will be able to enter into when the Soundtrails are finished and they're publicly available experiences. What does that mean, a publicly available experience? Well, it's kind of, by and large, it's sort of three things. The first one is, I guess, your website, where you can see this thing called the Bald Rock Soundtrail, and you would have a map and you would be able to play stories. The second one is on the Soundtrails app itself, and that would be the Bald Rock Soundtrails experience. And the third one would be where you aren't necessarily at Bald Rock, but you would have the app on your phone and you can tap on the stories and you can activate the sounds to play. But really, in many ways, this sort of work rocks most of all when you're on site. And I think what comes out after 8 years for me working in this field is just how extraordinary and powerful and profoundly meaningful it is to be on site and to be hearing voices, songs, and stories that speak to the world around me. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I like to put the computer outside and to be able to record in this sort of capacity, as opposed to being in my studio back in Queensland, because this is kind of real. You know, there's wind and there's a thunderstorm happening over yonder, and there's birds, and the sun's going down, and it's beautiful, and it's provisional to the real world around me. And that's what location-based audio is all about. It's really storytelling and listening experiences which are very tuned into, very plugged into the world around us in its many 24-hour shades of grey. And the Bald Rock Soundtrail will be, I think we'll soon have around 2021 Soundtrails in operation. But of course, with the version 2 Soundtrails, we can now open up to this really rich new range of experiences where people can also come in on a license, and they can build their own Soundtrail, a type of Soundtrail. Yeah. So the Bald Rock Soundtrail. Well, the Bald Rock Soundtrail entails me working alongside Michael Lieberman from the National Parks here, and also Emma Johnson from the Visitors Information Centre. And it entails me building a raft of stories and conducting a range of interviews and compiling research material, photographs, archival material, so as I can enable a really rich and immersive walking experience when you walk up the Bald Rock itself. Bald Rock, in case you don't know, is again 30 kilometres north of here. It's on the old Lindsay Highway, which used to be the main road between Sydney and Brisbane. It's very close to the New South Wales border, and it's a great big hunking piece of granite. And I think it's one of the biggest rocks in Australia, the world. I'm not sure anyway. It's pretty impressive. This is granite country where I am, just literally behind me, and down there is granite everywhere. So it's quite shaly, sort of sandy soil. It's quite poor soil. But granite also brings with it really this amazing kind of dynamic power as you walk through the landscape. And Bald Rock is one of these real sort of granite epicenters. It's surrounded by forest, and then slowly you kind of circumnavigate is that the right word? You kind of traverse the side of the hill coming up through the forest, and then you come out through some huge, great big granite boulders, and you start getting onto the top of the rock, and you can look down, and you get pretty much unimpeded 360-degree views across Queensland and down to New South Wales, right out west, and then you can't quite see the coast, but you get pretty close. So it's a real vantage point. It's a really important, prominent point here. And it used to be quite an important place for, and still is, beg your pardon, it still is a very important point for Aboriginal community here. Yeah. The park was gazetted in the 1970s, largely through the work of a man called John Summerlad, who is in his 80s, and he's still living here in Tenterfield. And I was very lucky to be able to interview John at length about his work with the Bald Rock National Park. So John was a park ranger with national parks and a guide, and he grew up around here as a kid. His grandfather, and I think it might have even been his great grandfather, worked on one of the big one of Australia's biggest sheep stations, which is called Tenterfield Station, in the 1800s, and eventually his grandfather and then his father were farmers, and so John grew up here. And when he was in his 20s, he was pig shooting with another friend around the Bald Rock area, and they literally scaled the mountain with their rifles, scaled the Bald Rock with their rifles, and that was the first time that John had come across Bald Rock. So I guess I want to just pull back a little bit, and I just want to talk about making stories on location. What does making stories on location mean? What is this thing of locative audio? Well, Bald Rock's one of a number of sites on the Soundtrail system. We started in Uralla down in New South Wales. The last one that we did was probably about a couple of 100 k's away, down at a place called Walker, which was a town that boasts some really world-class sculptures, and we worked with the artists and the community there, fashioning an experience that people could then download on the Soundtrails, and they could walk around the town. So each of these Soundtrails, I guess, has a similar component, and that they're building on the app platform. Now, when I say building on the app platform, that means that the person who's the producer, like me, has to come in on what we call a builder, and that's the back end of the system. And at that point, they're able to upload a map. They're able to sort of place that map into a system so that when that map is recognized by the app, it corresponds to the right GPS points. And therein, we're able to upload audio, decide which audio might have pictures with it, whether it's visible, whether it's invisible, whether it's a polygon-shaped audio field, whether it's a circle audio field, whether it just plays once, whether it loops. So the back-end builder essentially is a framework from where the on-site experience can be choreographed. I hope that makes sense. It's getting a bit dark, isn't it? Sorry about that. And that's where everything kind of happens at first stage. Once a producer has amassed the necessary materials, done the research, and produced what he or she feels are good stories that correspond to location, they then place audio fields into this onto the map in the back end builder, and they start to choreograph this experience so it works as a whole. And I think that that is a really interesting place. It's a really interesting canvas for storytellers, which I think is highly underestimated at the moment. And I just so wish people who are involved in podcasting and in radio documentary would start to cotton on as to how rich it is, not only to build these stories that that testify to these places, but to do them on location. So what does that mean? Well, I think it's a new template. It's a new genre. It's a new sort of mechanism for storytelling. And I think that after 8 years working in this field, I feel like I'm only really just starting to understand the tools that are available and the different approaches that we can take in terms of encountering and immersing ourselves in these stories on location. And I think a big part of this, unlike podcasting or radio documentary, a big part of this is the actual location itself. And each location is so very different. Bald Rock is, as I said, 30 kilometres north of Tenterfield. It's on a fairly kind of quiet highway. You turn off, I think the road ends about 4 or 5 kilometres. You park in a car park, and then you begin the ascent of the rock, which is about, I don't know, for me, I'm fairly fit. It's about sort of 40, 45 minutes until you get to the top. But along the way, of course, there's just a treasure trove of kind of things to go off, things to reflect on, things to look at. So how does a producer, I guess, undertake to create a cohesive and immersive, well-rounded sort of storytelling experience, which marries both the location and the material that he or she were able to get? It's fascinating. So with this Bald Rock Soundtrail, for me, I've interviewed some of the local people who are on the local farms, and you know, they've been there for 4 or 5 generations. There was an old gold mining town just down the road called Bunabanu. There's north of there is the Bukakarara, which is a creek. But I guess for me, in terms of building something like this, it's who will talk to me and what material can I get? How do I fashion this out of what material I might get? And it's really lovely, actually. It's really lovely because there's people who've made it their life sort of passion or their life's business to record, to document, to compile, to archive stories from around towns. And you know, these are often unsung kind of women who are in the 60s or 70s, or they're you know, they're sort of regional historians. But there's also people who I think are very unassuming about what stories they have, and are quite surprised when they might get a knock on the door from me or a phone call asking them if they could speak in some ways in relation to the Soundtrail that I'm building. And it was really lovely. It was actually really lovely me contacting John Summerlad, who again was the park ranger behind the Bald Rock Soundtrail. Really lovely me contacting him. He was so pleased, I think, that someone was taking an interest in the history of Bald Rock and also some of the work that he'd done. So John in the 70s basically wanted to simply go around and record and compile and document stories around this region to do with Aboriginal stories. And he primarily became a park guide or a park ranger in order to have the capacity to engage Aboriginal people and to document some of these stories. I think that working as a park ranger, working as a guide, I think probably took up a lot of his work. But he did amass a number of recordings from his from the early 70s, and these are now on the public record through IATSIS, and we're currently negotiating, seeing if we can use these on the Soundtrail with the local Bundjalung community, and also see maybe whether there's some way we can help with archiving some of these audio recordings, which are beautiful. They're beautiful. They're with a number of sort of Aboriginal elders in the late 60s and the early 70s. And they really speak to sort of the broader Western Bundjalung area and a number of prominent sites that intersect with Bald Rock. So without sort of getting into that too much, I think one of the things which really strikes me after 8 years working in this field is the sense of legitimacy or veracity or sort of authenticity that building location-based experiences brings when it comes to whose voices are in there. I think this is a really interesting question, and I don't profess to have the answer, but one thing which is really patently obvious to me after working for 8 years now in this field and working across a range of different communities and a range of different towns is that some people bring real authority to this, and I think that authority is earned. I don't think that it's necessarily just Aboriginal people per se, but I do think that their stories have a depth, a history, and a very hard-earned quality that makes it really hard to go past. I don't think that you know, the idea of having a close relationship to places and having, you know, deep stories that go back and feeling very powerful, feeling very strong about our relationship to places. I don't think anyone necessarily has a monopoly on that. But I do think that when you place stories back on location, when you put voices, songs and stories and they're activated next to that giant stone or on the top of somewhere like Bald Rock, or you know, at a memorial site that might be rendered otherwise very mute, and you get those voices and you get those stories back and you activate them there, you're doing something really very profound. And I I just think that that what's going on here is more than just a kind of a new technology. I think that there's something much deeper here that's going on. And I think that location-based audio projects like Soundtrails are really tapping into something that's quite timeless, and it really sort of feeds into, I think, a deeper sense of who we are, how we make sense of who we are, and what meaning we have in relation to the world that we live in and the places that we occupy. And I think that location-based audio projects like Soundtrails are really tapping into that sort of deep sort of nexus between meaning, place, belonging, and experience. And I don't know that many people have really come to understand that projects like Soundtrails are going to, in some ways, continue to grow just by dint of the fact that increasingly people are arriving in towns like Tenterfield and they want to know what to do. And I guess on the surface of things, there's things like the RSL's open from 9 to 5. This place is here. There's the library they can visit. There's the Tourist Visitor Information Centre. But I think when you download a Soundtrail, something like, for example, the Gunnywiggle Aboriginal Fringe Camp Soundtrail, which is maybe about 3 hours drive west of here. And I think when you walk around a site like that and you travel with the people who've lived on this marginal fringe camp, and you get to hear their stories and their struggles and their laughter and the way they talk and what the place meant to them, and how this place was where they did the washing and that place was where they, they were bathed as babies, and the story of their mother and father and how they came there in the 40s or the 50s, then I think something very different's going on here. Different than stories as told through books on the page, through broadcasts and radio, through podcasts. This is a new way of experiencing stories. And I think that that increasingly we're going to be able to not only kind of fashion these types of stories as producers and storytellers, but people are going to want for their places to speak and to be activated and to meaningfully engage people. And there's so many ways that this can happen. There's so many types of stories that people can use. I'm thinking, for example, of a project in London that I did a couple of years ago called the Cartographer's Confession, which is taking people around the old immigrant sort of wharf area of the River Thames, and it's not history. It's not like Soundtrails. It's not kind of cultural history. This is a story. This is a piece of fiction. This is built to be experienced from one place, then the story develops to another place, then the story travels across the river, and it finishes right on the river at what was it called? Bournemouth. Anyway, this beautiful old Norwegian church right on the river, which is where the story finishes. So that's a very different type of approach to the locative storied experience. And I think as we go forward, whether you're an architect, whether you're a design student, whether you're a historian, whether you're involved in history, cultural tourism, you're a musician, whether you're a sound engineer, whether you're a small community wanting to provide things that people can do when they're in town, I think that this is the way things are going to go. And I think that audio, unlike audio-visual, is really going to command something quite special here, because the world around us and the the environment that surround us, it is in many ways just as much part of the story as anything that we see on our computer. In many ways, the mobile phone is simply a sort of a vehicle. It's a conduit. It's a delivery device in terms of how we unpack this experience, how we hear this story, how we experience this narrative, and really, in many ways, for me, the main sort of object as a producer of these projects is for the technology to get out of the road, and for you to be able to walk freely in and out of compelling, beautifully produced, immersive experiences that really, in various ways, bring the place alive. So that's what I'm in the business of doing, and how lucky am I to be able to do this, and to think that we're commissioned to do this, and to think that we also now have in our hot little hands this beautiful version 2 Soundtrails platform, which is now hot off the press, and you can go into Soundtrails Tech and you can sign up and you can give it a go. And you too can have a crack at building amazing location-based audio experiences. If you want to, you can give it a go for free, or you can sign up on a licensing system that allows you to use exactly the same tools and the same system that I'm using, and you can fashion your own place-based audio story and do what you want with it. The really cool thing about the version 2 Soundtrail system is that when you've finished and you've built what you think is a fantastic audio experience, you can simply take a code off the builder and you can send that to your friends. They download the Soundtrails, they type into the sandpit the code, and whammo, they can see the on-site audio experience as anyone would see if they were on site. And if they walk on that site, then those stories will lift up with the images. Some of them might be hidden, some of them might be visible with images. So it's a fully integrated location-based audio experience. Another extremely cool thing is that you can take your location-based audio experience, which you've made, and you can embed that code onto any website around the world, which means that you can simulate what you've done and people can experience it remotely. They're obviously not on site. So these are just a kind of couple of the really cool things that Soundtrails version 2 is doing. And I hope you check it out. And in time to come, if you're ever down in New South Wales and you're wanting something really cool to do, you can do the Tenterfield Soundtrail, or you can drive a bit further north and you can do what's going to be a very cool Bald Rock Soundtrail. Thank you very much for listening. All the best. And please do contact us on Soundtrails Tech if you have any questions. Bye.